Thank you for watching Scary Bear Attacks. If you like this episode, please remember to hit the like button and leave a comment or two, then subscribe and click on the bell to receive notifications of whenever we release new videos. Also, please remember to share them to your social media. Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks. Today's episode takes us to the Elephant Back Loop Trail in Yellowstone National Park. The park is seated on the side of the world's largest batholith volcano, which provides the energy for the geysers and geothermal phenomenon here. This area is around 8,000 feet high in elevation and is thickly timbered rolling hills overlooking Yellowstone Lake. The forests, primarily of lodgepole pine, are 150 to 300 years old and are described by the Yellowstone Board of Review report regarding this episode as gray and brown in color. Given the age of the forest and the amount of duff accumulated on the forest floor, many forms of edible fungi grow on the ground and deadfall trees. These fungi provide a valuable source of nutrients to animals in the area and perform a vital function in the ecosystem. Animals like elk, deer, and moose will often dine on mushrooms whenever they can find them. Of the predators in the area, only bobcats and cougars are not known to consume mushrooms, but wolves, coyotes, as well as black bears and grizzly bears frequently seek them out as fare. Elephant Back Trail climbs 800 feet over its duration, which is only 1.5 miles long. About 0.8 of a mile up the trail is a fork. The left route leads directly to the overlook, which grants visitors a stunning view of the lake. The right route winds a bit more, but ends at the same overlook. As far as trails go, it isn't much of a trail, as it only takes visitors an hour or so to complete the loop. But if danger were measured by distance, it may be one of the most dangerous trails in the world. On Thursday, August 6, 2015, 63-year-old Lance Crosby was performing his duties at Lake Medical Clinic, where he had worked for the past 5 years. He was a native of Billings, Montana, and an avid hiker and outdoorsman. Just before lunchtime, Lance's coworkers reported seeing him at the medical center. He had recently injured his ankle and was in the habit of going out for walks near the center to help it heal and rehabilitate it. Lance enjoyed taking shortcuts through trail circuits just to wander through the stands of trees. On this day, he took no firearm nor bear spray with him. His coworkers watched Lance walk off along the road toward Elephant Back Trail and returned to their duties. On August 7th, Lance was expected at the center for work, but didn't show up at the start of his 8 a.m. shift. The staff thought this was peculiar, as he wasn't the kind of person to be late, and definitely would have called in had he come down with an illness. By 9 a.m., the staff at the medical center called in and reported Lance missing. Park rangers immediately formed a search team, and foot search teams began searching on Yellowstone Lake Beach, Natural Bridge Road, and Elephant Back Trail. During the search on Elephant Back Trail, a ranger discovered a carnivore food cache with a boot protruding ominously from beneath it. The ranger immediately backed out of the area, and all hikers were ordered to leave to preserve safety and evidence. An investigative team comprised of law enforcement officers, biologists, and medical professionals was formed. After the report of the carnivore food cache had reached the team, they prepared for a body recovery. About a half-mile northeast of the trail, rangers heard a cub bark 3 or 4 times as they approached. They observed a sow with dark brown legs and a light brown rump running away from the cache site. Once at the site, the investigative team began gathering evidence. They could see grizzly tracks from one sow and at least one cub near Lance's body. The bears had partially eaten his remains and then covered him in dirt and pine needles, indicating they were planning on returning to eat the rest of him after digesting the portions they had already consumed. Lance's remains were removed by helicopter and analyzed by forensic experts. They found deep bruising and puncture wounds on his arms, hands, head, face, shoulders, and upper back, indicating that he was alive when these wounds were inflicted. He had attempted to defend himself during the bear attack, based on the location of the wounds on his arms and hands. The puncture wounds on Lance's corpse were measured for comparison with the teeth of any bear thought to have been involved. After further analysis, Lance was found to have died from blunt force trauma to the area near his brainstem. He had been struck by the sow's paws with enough force that the blows had caused his death. At the attack scene, forensic experts collected bear hair samples and bodily fluids from the bears. They discovered that the grizzly had killed Crosby in an ambush and left him with very little time to react. He was face down with his left arm beneath his chest and his left leg crossed over his right calf. I've posted pictures of the attack site sketched by the forensics teams, as well as the picture of the dead bear on my Patreon link below. These images would not pass YouTube guidelines, so you can see them there. They are disturbing, at least as disturbing as a sketch of a bear attack scene and a photo of a dead bear can be, so look at them at your own discretion. Lance's baseball cap was found near his left boot, and his body was buried right where the attack had occurred, meaning the grizzly had not dragged him away at all. The investigators also reported that she had not run upon him, but the attack happened from extremely close range. The soil around the attack site wasn't disturbed. There were no tissue or clothing fragments strewn about, and his possessions were found near his body. He didn't even have time to run. The biologists on the scene searched for natural feeding behaviors and evidence. Bear daybeds and scat were located right next to rock cairns and other human-created rock formations left by prior visitors. DNA evidence was pulled from scat piles, and profiles from a sow and a cub were identified. They determined that the bears were likely foraging for mushrooms, and Lance had walked right up to them just before the attack. They were likely devouring mushrooms or napping just afterward when the surprise confrontation occurred. Equipped with this knowledge, biologists set out foot snare traps at the attack scene, hoping to catch the sow when she returned to her food cache. The night following the attack, she triggered the snare, and it held her fast until bear researchers could tranquilize her. Upon confirming through DNA evidence and bite wound measurements that they had the right bear, officials ordered the sow to be euthanized. As for her cubs, they were also trapped in the following days. They were not killed, but authorities deemed them to possibly be conditioned to see people as food. They were sent to a zoo to live out the remainder of their lives. After euthanizing the sow, investigators determined that she was only 259 pounds, which is thin for a grizzly bear. She had invested much of her food in the 1-year-old cubs she'd been raising. Regarding euthanizing grizzlies, park officials stated that they do not take the matter lightly. Had the sow been determined to have acted in defense of her cubs, she would likely have been left alone, if not relocated to areas further from civilization. Given that she had consumed portions of Lance's body and cached his remains for later consumption, they had no choice in the matter. Lance Crosby's death was the 8th human fatality in Yellowstone since 1916, but the 5th since 1984. 44 people have reportedly been injured by bears in Yellowstone National Park over its 150-year history. Grizzly numbers are estimated to be over 1,000 bears in the greater Yellowstone area, with the park only claiming 150 to 200 grizzlies within its boundaries. That means the difference of up to 800 grizzly bears are spread all around Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming. After reviewing the facts surrounding this episode, I'm left with a few questions for you. If Lance had been packing bear spray, would he even have had time to dispense it? Was the sow defending her mushroom feeding grounds, or did she predate on Lance? Do you think the cubs would have copied the behavior they saw the sow do and consider humans as a source of food in their future? That's an ominous thought. Grizzly bears in the zoo watching something they think of as food walk by and stare at them and throw peanuts at them all day. Will you cast an extra cautious glance over your shoulder next time you're out picking mushrooms? I'll be glad to read and respond to your thoughts, so please post them in the comments section below, and let's talk about it. Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks. Today's episode takes us to the Kenai Peninsula in southern Alaska. This huge jut of land pokes into the Gulf of Alaska and extends toward Kodiak Island. It has some high mountains in the southeast of the peninsula, but near Soldotna is a low-elevation plain that gently rolls into the Cook Inlet. The towns here push into the forest, which consists of birch, hemlock, and spruce trees. Common animals here include moose, porcupines, and hares. The predators on the peninsula are much more diverse, with weasels, foxes, lynx, and coyotes rounding out the smaller meat-eaters. The larger ones are much more dangerous and include wolves, black bears, and brown bears. The Kenai River originates at Kenai Lake, which is fed by the Russian River. It flows for about 50 miles as the crow flies and empties into the Cook Inlet near the town of Kenai. The salmon that migrate upstream begin their lives as fry, which grow in Kenai and Skylac lakes before making their way to the sea for a few years. Upon their return, the salmon continue a flow of nutrients from the land to the sea and back again that sustains brown bears, as well as many other plants and animals in the ecology. This cycle on the Kenai Peninsula has supported over 600 brown bears. But these bears are genetically isolated and are trending downward in numbers, according to recent assessments. They have a unique gene pool among brown bears, which would be a pity to see go extinct. Just a little east of Soldotna is a town called Funny River. It is a dot of a town, which doesn't seem like a town at all, but more of an incorporated area. Around mile marker 11 of the Funny River Road that runs through town, a 62-year-old man named Danny High had his home on an acreage. One of his favorite things to do was to take the dogs for a walk and enjoy the fresh air and beautiful scenery the Kenai River offers. Now, Danny's acreage was at an interesting location on Funny River Road. To the south is land owned by varying federal, state, and tribal agencies, which is left in its natural state. Here, brown bears can travel freely and fight and mate and do all the normal bear stuff. To the west and the east of Danny's property, housing developments and busy roads crowd the bears' access to the Kenai River and the salmon that they pull from it. But right near Danny's property, development thins, and access to the river is much easier for the bears. To find similar access to the river, the bears would have to go 6 miles to the east, just to avoid human development. This bottleneck in travel corridors creates a funnel for hungry bears and leads them on a path right to Danny's and his neighbors' doorsteps. On September 13, 2015, around 4:30 p.m., Danny was out walking the dogs along one of the many four-wheeler roads that crisscross the area. The trails make the perfect escape into the trees that surround the residential developments. Brown bears are a frequent sight on these trails, but locals are so used to being near them that their presence isn't even alarming. On his hike, Danny didn't bring a firearm, nor did he bring along bear spray. Danny was such a good neighbor, he would frequently take his neighbor's dog for a walk. The dog's name was Layla, and her owner was named Diane Deming. After Danny picked up Layla from Diane's house, the two of them disappeared into the labyrinth of quad trails for a quick escape. Diane knew they wouldn't be long, and expected them to return in about 30 minutes or so. Danny enjoyed one of the benefits of pet ownership without the responsibility of taking care of one. He often took Layla out for walks, and she seemed to enjoy them too. After he spent some time relaxing in the woods, the two of them would go back and resume their lives as usual. But today would turn out to be very different from most days. As Danny and Layla made their way into the nearby trees, another denizen was also using the quad trails. A huge brown bear was likely making his way along the Kenai River in search of salmon carcasses or berries to pack on weight for hibernation. It was mid-fall now, and if the bear didn't have enough calories, it might not make it through the winter, so every calorie mattered. At this point of the fall, bears are in a state called hyperphagia, which is a hormonal state of intense hunger and desire for food. They are known to cover much broader swaths of territory in search of food sources, and will sometimes seek food from sources they wouldn't consider in prior seasons of the year. If the berry season was poor, or the salmon run was meager, then bears would have no option but to push in closer to town in search of food. As Danny and Layla walked down the quad trail, at some point they crossed paths with this massive brown bear. The details of just how this run-in occurred have not been relayed or made public. The results of the incident left Danny with grievous injuries and sent Layla dashing back to Diane. At 4:36 p.m., Diane heard Layla scratching at the back door. Before she could let Layla in, she heard her scratching at the front door. Diane hurried back toward the front door and let Layla inside, but Danny wasn't with her. Diane thought that perhaps he'd let her run ahead of him, so she glanced down the road, but couldn't see Danny. After a few minutes, her questions were answered, as emergency vehicles began to blare their sirens and converge on a nearby location. There was no way Diane could know, but a brown bear had attacked Danny while he and Layla were out for a walk. After Danny was severely injured, he somehow managed to pull out his cell phone and call 911. The sirens Diane heard were responding to his own request for help. First responders were sent out to the attack location at 4:45 p.m., and the first unit arrived by 4:58 p.m. Although their description of Danny's injuries was not detailed, they were described as very serious. It took the paramedics only 5 minutes to request a medical helicopter to Danny's location. It ferried him to a hospital in Anchorage, where he was held in critical condition. Danny went through his first surgery there on Monday. With injuries beyond their scope of care, the hospital in Anchorage arranged for an emergency medical flight, which took Danny to Harborview Medical Center in Seattle, Washington. After arriving at Harborview, additional surgical procedures would be completed to close and repair tissue damage the bear had done to Danny. Wildlife officers quickly converged on the attack site and searched for the bear responsible for Danny's mauling. Even though the search was thorough, it was fruitless in finding a bear in the area. Authorities decided to adopt a strategy of waiting out the bear to see if it would return and pose further risks to residents of the area. After the bear didn't return, they concluded that the attack was likely defensive, and the bear didn't have predatory motives in attacking Danny. According to Danny's wife, his recovery was slow but steady. Given his proximity to town and access to immediate medical attention, his life was saved. Events could have ended up very differently for him if he were only a few miles away from the resources needed to save his life. From the time Danny left Diane's house with Layla to the point he called 911, only 6 minutes had elapsed. He was located a quarter-mile from his home, which means most of that 6 minutes was spent walking with Layla and not being attacked by the bear. In only a few seconds, this bear did enough damage to Danny's body to threaten his life, in a location that would make the thought of this scenario unlikely. Due to the rapid response and availability of medical attention, he survived. After reviewing the facts surrounding this episode, I'm left with a few questions for you. Do you think bear spray would have prevented this attack? I kind of doubt it. Do you think Layla's presence may have been a contributing factor in the attack? Is the development around Kenai River an example of poor planning? The next time you take your dog out for a walk in the woods, will you be packing bear spray or a firearm? I'll gladly read and reply to your thoughts, so please post them in the comments section below, and let's talk about it. Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks. Today's episode takes us to central Romania, to the Carpathian Mountains. The South Carpathians have a range called the Addicus Mountains. They are a spectacular high range with peaks stretching over 8,000 feet in elevation, and are one of Europe's last remaining wilderness areas. The rocky peaks of the mountains give way to forests at about 6,500 feet in elevation. This range hosts about 6,000 European brown bears, which is about 60% of the European brown bear population, and is one of the few places they are still flourishing. In the Addicus, oak and beech trees shelter bison, wild boar, and Danube Delta wild horses. These animals don't roam freely in much of their prior European habitat, so Romania's efforts to preserve them are admirable. The predators of this area include wolves, lynx, and brown bears. On June 9, 2019, 26-year-old German graduate student Andy Bauer was hiking with his 23-year-old partner, Laura Booth, from Cambridge, UK. They had accepted an invitation to enjoy a 5-day expedition through the Addicus Mountains, backpacking their way from one tent campsite to the next. They were attending graduate school in Berlin, Germany, and looking forward to some time in the wilderness. The life of a student can be stressful, so they took the opportunity while they had the time to do it. As they packed their backpacks for the trip, Laura grabbed her bear spray and placed it in her pile of items to pack. Andy told her that they were more likely to have the bear spray explode than to experience a bear attack, so she agreed to take it out and leave it at home. They drove to a mountain town called Briaza and parked their car in front of a monastery. A priest struck up a conversation with the couple and inquired about their plans. Once they informed him, he cautioned them from going into the mountains. Laura had a sense of foreboding about the trip, but chalked these feelings up to them adventuring into the wilderness. She had been reading about panthers and bears, and thought she may have worked herself up with such information. On the first day of the hike, they saw a lizard and a snake. They'd also watched 6 wild boars root around for food on the forest floor. Andy jokingly said they would next see a bear. On the second day of their trip, they'd hiked about 3 hours before they came upon a mangled and partially eaten deer fawn. It was fresh, and was a clear sign that a bear was in the area. They hadn't seen any bear tracks or scat, so this sudden sight was concerning. Andy was walking about 20 feet ahead of Laura when they walked upon the fawn. They'd paused to look the carcass over, when they heard a rustling in the bushes right next to them. Andy lifted his gaze from the fawn carcass, and his legs went weak with what filled his vision. An enormous brown bear was standing less than 4 feet from him, and alongside her were her 2 cubs. The sow's shoulder was nearly the same height as Andy as he stood to his full height. The sow swung her head toward Andy and was unaware of the hikers, until now. Upon seeing him, she let out a roar so loud that it vibrated his rib cage. Andy wanted to run, but was frozen in fear. He was facing slightly away from the bear, with her to his right-hand side. His mind was racing so fast that he could not decide what to do. The sow leaped forward and clamped her jaws around his right calf muscle. With a powerful jerk of her massive head, she dropped him to his back and dragged him several feet. Laura was petrified with fear upon sight of the bears. She could only yell at the bear while it jerked Andy from his feet. As she watched, the bear tossed her head back and forth very quickly, which jerked Andy from one side of the bear to the other and then back again. Then the sow dragged Andy several yards into the bushes. Laura followed them into the brush while making sure to stay away from the cubs. As the pain shot through Andy's right calf muscle, he yelled for Laura to help him. Laura screamed out to Andy to punch the bear in the eye, as she had heard somewhere that this was a way to defend yourself during a bear attack. Andy swung his fist at the bear's eye with all of his might. He knew there was nothing Laura could do to help him, so he had to help himself. His punch was perfectly placed and whacked against the sow's head with a loud thud. The bear immediately released her grip on Andy's leg. She turned and gathered her cubs up. The three bears disappeared into the bushes, leaving Andy and Laura terrified and bleeding. After watching the bear leave, Laura ran to Andy's side to assess his injuries. She looked his right calf muscle over and could see that the majority of the muscle of his calf had been torn open and his leg was bent in places where it wasn't supposed to. She searched through his backpack, pulled out several socks, and improvised an inadequate but necessary tourniquet. Pictures of Andy's wounds would not pass YouTube guidelines, so I've uploaded them to my Patreon account. It is linked below for your review. Please look at these photos at your discretion, as they are fairly graphic. Once Laura wrapped the socks around Andy's wound, they discussed what action they needed to take next. She was too small to help him walk out, so that option was off the table. The next option they'd considered required Laura to hike up the mountain until she found cell service. Andy agreed to wait for her and speak to himself loudly to scare away any other animals that may approach him. Laura didn't want to leave Andy there by himself, but hiked away, knowing she had to get help for it. She immediately grabbed her cell phone and headed up the steep mountainside. As she climbed, she glanced around, still worried about running into the bears again. Storm clouds gathered on the mountains around her in an ominous sign. After an hour, she got service and phoned first responders, who sent out a medical helicopter to their location. As the helicopter approached, they found Laura and landed nearby. She pointed out to the crew where Andy was as they flew her back to safety. The crew returned without Laura to pick up Andy and take him to a hospital in Briaza. Upon arriving at the hospital there, the medical team recognized Andy's wounds were too serious for their facility. He was immediately flown to a hospital in Targumuras. Andy underwent surgery to clean and repair the damage done to his lower leg during the bear attack. His tibia and fibula had been broken in 3 locations and required the insertion of 3 screws attached to an external cage to hold his bones in place until they healed. After receiving treatment in the hospital in Targumuras, Andy was transported back to Berlin to finish healing from the bear attack. He was bedridden for many weeks before his leg was strong enough to start rehabilitation. His perseverance through a very long and painful rehabilitation routine eventually led him to make a full recovery from his injuries. Now only the huge scars are left to remind him. After reviewing the facts surrounding this episode, I have a few questions for you. Do you think the bear spray may have prevented this attack? Do you think the bears returned to the fawn carcass after seeing Andy and Laura in the area? If Andy had dropped into the fetal position, would his mauling have been less severe? I will enjoy reading and replying to your thoughts, so please post them in the comments section below, and let's talk about it. Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks. Today's episode takes us to southwest Alaska and a small island just nestled into Uganik Bay of Kodiak Island. Though the island is known for giant bears, those bears aren't only on Kodiak, but also on the neighboring islands. One of these is Sally Island, which only rises about 1,000 feet in elevation. It's a diminutive island, only measuring about 2 miles wide by just under 2 miles long. Sally Island is covered in very dense foliage, composed primarily of huge stands of alder, interrupted with meadows of grasses. There are no rivers on this small island, which means that brown bears on the island either have to search for fish off the shore or swim to the main island. This is easily done on the south end of the island, as Sheep Island comes close to connecting all three islands. Deer are just about the only animals on the island that are not predators, and that is what brings a handful of hunters to shore each fall. The brown bears on the island are directly related to the giant brown bears on Kodiak, so their temperament and power are well known. Now, a pack of bears is known as a sleuth or a maul, but bears aren't known to run in packs. There are a few exceptions to this rule, and one of them is when they are siblings or juveniles. Some call a pack of bears a sleuth because of the way bears search through the forest, as if they're detectives looking for facts. A pack of sibling bears is called a litter, but as they grow, this reference to them loses its applicability due to their age. When the cubs reach around 2 years of age, the sow will frequently run them off so she can more easily fend for herself. But if the cubs contribute to her survival, then she will tend to hunt with them. When the litter becomes a sleuth, and their mother manages to keep the litter together and raise them into juvenile bears, they can remain with her as a dangerous and efficient killing team. When a sow has a litter of cubs, the litter is usually between 1 and 3 in number. Cubs have a 34% mortality rate in Alaska and frequently spend at least 2 years with their mother. This means that only 2 cubs in a litter of 3 will survive to venture out on their own. The survival of the cubs depends on a few factors, including the availability of food sources and the willingness of the sow to defend them. If she can offer a violent defense of her cubs from boars, then her cubs will stand a good chance of reaching independence and success. On Thursday, October 30th, 2014, 68-year-old Michael Snowden and his 38-year-old hunting partner Jeff Ostrin arrived at their hunting camp. Each year the men would hunt together for a week on Sally Island and frequently filled their tags, refreshed their friendship, and filled their freezers for the winter. Snowden was a native of Alaska from Sitka, and Ostrin moved up from Camas, Washington. The men were hunting with the help of a guide and a party of about 10 deer hunters. They used a boat dubbed the Mary J. to deposit the hunters on various locations on the island to hunt for the day. At the end of the hunting day, the hunters would all reboard the boat to return to camp for the night. The first 6 days of their deer hunting went very well, with fun and surrounded by beautiful scenery. On November 4th, 2014, the men's hunt was going just as planned. They'd climbed the steep slopes of the island after coming ashore in the early morning. Pushing their way through brush and glassing breaks in the alders for bucks to emerge made the day slip by in a relaxing manner. At around 10 a.m., Ostrin observed a buck at the top of the island and stalked within shooting range. A single well-placed shot from his hunting rifle brought the buck down and filled one of their tags. As the buck disappeared below the brush, Snowden and Ostrin walked toward the spot where they last saw the buck. Upon arriving at the buck's location, they immediately started to process the deer for recovery by removing its entrails, or gutting it as hunters refer to it. While one man removed the entrails of the deer, the other would stand guard, watching for brown bears. Some bears tend to head to a location after hearing the report of a hunting rifle. These bears are called dinner bill bears, with a shot being the equivalent of calling them in for dinner. The hunters knew that time was key to avoid a confrontation with a hungry bear, and after gutting the deer, began dragging it toward the island's southeastern shore. The Mary J. was drifting just off the shore, and they would radio for it to pick them up when they were ready. As Ostrin and Snowden dragged their buck through the thick brush, a steady seep of blood and bodily fluids leaked out behind them in a tempting trail. This scent was easily detectable by any bears on the island in the right conditions, and would lead to a dangerous situation. With only about a mile left before they reached the shore, the hunters decided to sit down and eat their sandwiches for lunch. They removed their packs and walked about 20 feet farther downhill to sit down. No sooner had they taken the first few bites of their meals than they began to hear some rustling in the brush only a few yards from them. Given their location, the hunters knew this could be a harbinger of something very bad. They grabbed their rifles and chambered rounds in each one. Just as they closed their actions on their hunting rifles, a 700-pound brown bear burst from the brush in their direction. Down in the bay, the Mary J. was adrift when the hunters on the island came into view in the meadow. The handful of hunters aboard could see Snowden and Ostrin sit down and start eating. To their concern, they also saw 5 brown bears emerge just above the hunters. The bears appeared to be a sow, with her 4 very large 3-year-old cubs. The hunters could see the bears lift their noses to sample the air, and then drop their noses to the blood trail of the deer's carcass in the grass. They were interested in whatever was on the breeze, wafting from Snowden and Ostrin's direction. A scent of deer blood and guts, likely mixed in with that of the hunter's lunch and the hunters themselves, combined in an alluring aroma to the bears. The hunters aboard the Mary J. immediately radioed Ostrin and Snowden, but they received no answer. Unbeknownst to the boat, they had turned off their radio while they were packing the deer out and planned to turn it back on to contact the vessel after reaching the shore. The hunters decided to try to signal Snowden and Ostrin by firing their hunting rifles into the air as a warning. It was deer season, and the report of deer hunting rifles wasn't out of the ordinary. Snowden and Ostrin passed off the rifle shots as nearby deer hunters pursuing their quarry. It was then that the hunters aboard the Mary J. noticed that the sow had finally caught the scent she was searching for on the breeze. Once she figured out where the scent was coming from, she dashed directly toward the source with amazing speed. When the hunters on the Mary J. witnessed the sow running toward Snowden and Ostrin, they knew they had to do something to help. The boat was pointed ashore, and they began scrambling up the steep slope toward the deer carcass. Back at the deer carcass, as soon as the bushes began to rustle and the men chambered rounds in their hunting rifles, the angry sow had busted from the brush. Snowden fired off a hip shot as a warning to her, but it missed striking the bear. Before he could do much else, the sow had tackled him to the ground, biting and scratching his body wherever she could reach. Between Snowden twisting and kicking, and the sow's jaws snapping and her claws slashing, the sow had ended up with a vice-like grip on his hamstring. He could feel her teeth punch through the outermost layer of tissues, then click together. She violently shook her massive head back and forth, tossing Snowden around along with it. As the sow jerked him back and forth, Snowden lost his grip on his hunting rifle. He desperately tried to flick the leather strap securing his revolver to its holster on his chest, but due to the jostling, was unable to loosen it. She pulled him down the slope a few yards during the furious attack before the 1.5-pound chunk of the man's flesh tore loose. As Ostrin watched his friend being mauled by the sow, he tried to find a way to shoot her without injuring Snowden. He decided a rump shot would distract the bear and fired into her rear end, hoping to break her hips and immobilize her. The bear didn't release Snowden, so Ostrin chambered another round and fired into the bear's ribs. The sow and Snowden began tumbling down the hill for a short distance after Ostrin's second bullet struck her. During this tumble, they separated from each other a few yards, allowing Ostrin to fire a third shot, killing the sow. By now the bear and both of the men were a few yards down the hill from where the attack had started. Ostrin briefly checked on Snowden before climbing up the hill to retrieve their backpacks and radio. As Ostrin radioed the Mary J., a second bear appeared from the brush, from near where the sow had emerged. Now, having had more than enough action for the day, Ostrin pulled his pistol from its holster and dispatched this bear with a single shot. It was slightly smaller in size than the sow, and he realized it was likely her cub. Upon hearing the shots and now unable to find their mother, the other 3 juvenile bears fled the area. By now the Mary J. had made land, and the handful of hunters had scrambled a fair portion up the hill toward the men. As they arrived at the attack site, they began to gather the men's backpacks and other gear, as well as render first aid to Snowden's separated hamstring wound. As they examined the injuries, they could see a piece of skin and muscle about 8 by 11 inches had ripped loose and flopped around, being attached at only one end. Beneath this slab of tissue, they could see an enormous hole in Snowden's hamstring. The Mary J.'s captain used the boat's radio to reach out to the U.S. Coast Guard. They dispatched a Sikorsky HH-60 Jayhawk to Sally Island. As they waited for the helicopter, the hunters tried to keep Snowden awake and from falling into shock. They put pressure on his wound and tried to keep him comfortable as best they could. Once the Coast Guard helicopter arrived on the scene, they deployed a tethered litter to the ground with a rescue expert. They loaded Snowden into the litter, and he was pulled aboard the copter before they headed for Providence Kodiak Island Medical Center. Ostrin was flown back to Kodiak in a small chartered plane. Once he was admitted to the hospital, Snowden's wounds were cleaned, and he received 100 staples to reattach his flesh to his hamstring. By Thursday of the same week, he was hobbling around the hospital without a cane. Both men expressed gratitude to medical staff, fellow hunters, and the Mary J.'s crew for their handling of the attack, treatment, and rescue. The Alaska Fish and Game issued a public statement reminding hunters to remove meat from the carcass of their game and place it in sealed containers instead of packing out the entire carcass. Leaving the bones in a fall could provide a distraction for bears converging on the carcass. Snowden says the big takeaway from this experience for him is how quickly the bears picked up on the scent of the blood of the deer. He encourages hunters not to underestimate how sensitive bears' noses can be. Alaska is home to 98% of the brown bears in the United States, which puts the attacks reported in Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming into perspective. If there were the same density of people in Alaska as there are along the Great Divide, would there be the same frequency of attacks? After reviewing the facts surrounding this episode, I'm left with a few questions for you. Does the fact that this sow successfully raised 4 cubs and kept them with her as juveniles indicate that she was a good defender of them? Do you think the bears would have been distracted by the carcass had the men removed only the meat from it? Would the hunters have made it safely to the shore if they hadn't stopped to eat, or would the bears have caught them before that? What do you think would have happened had the hunters dropped into a fetal position and just waited for the bears to leave? Tell me what would go through your mind if you were covered in deer blood and guts as you watched 5 brown bears emerge from the brush only a few yards from you. I will gladly read and respond to your thoughts, so please post them in the comments section below, and let's talk about it. Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks. Today's episode takes us to the Japanese island of Hokkaido. On the southern part of the island is Mount Daisingen. It is only around 3,500 feet high, and is the location of our episode today. This mountainous area is shaded by forests of Sakhalin fir, Sakhalin spruce, Japanese oak, birch, and painted maple trees. The island of Hokkaido is home to several unique species found nowhere else on Earth. Cicadee and wild boar are common here, but the giant salamander, Ezo flying squirrel, tanuki, and the amami rabbit are Hokkaido exclusives. The predators here include the Ezo red fox, tanuki, weasels, and brown bears. An alarming trend has been developing on the island over the last few years, which has reached its climax. Government policy on bear management has been successful in increasing bear numbers. Habitat recovery is also progressing as people leave rural areas for more lucrative jobs in the cities. This leaves the agricultural buffer around cities vacant of humans and their activities. Without regular contact with people, brown bears here have become emboldened and have started to attack people like they've never before. On October 29, 2022, 22-year-old college student Kanato Yanaki was driving to Mount Daisingen for a hike. He was a fourth-year student at Hokkaido University in Fukushima and was studying fisheries management. Kanato enjoyed hiking and mountain climbing. He was intelligent and adventurous, loving anything outside. Kanato loaded his gear and boarded his vehicle for the 45-minute drive to the parking lot at the trailhead on Mount Daisingen. The winding road rises from the coastal highway at sea level to just below the peak at 3,500 feet high. Each bend in the road represented an ever-improving view of the forest eventually giving way to the ocean. Upon arriving at the trailhead, Kanato parked his car and headed up the trail toward the peak, but he was not seen again after leaving his home. Earlier in the summer of 2022, 54-year-old fisherman Toshihiro Nishikawa was fishing for Sakhalin taimen in Lake Shimoronai in the northern part of the island. Taimen are similar to North American steelhead, but are much larger. They can reach 6 feet in length and weigh 100 pounds. They're trophy fish valued around the world. Nishikawa was dropped off to fish alone by a fishing guide he had contracted to help him on his fishing trip. As the fishing guide piloted his boat away, he observed a brown bear near the location. He reached out to Nishikawa by way of radio, but was unsuccessful in contacting him. Deciding the bear likely wouldn't be a problem, he piloted his boat out of the area to leave Nishikawa in peace to fish. A few hours later, the fishing guide returned to pick up Nishikawa, but couldn't raise him on the radio. Searchers were sent to the lake and found his severed head submerged in the water. A short distance away, a brown bear was observed chewing on his waders. A search for his body was unsuccessful. Local police organized a bear hunt and killed a brown bear, but weren't sure if it was the bear that killed Nishikawa. Authorities issued public warnings to citizens who were planning on venturing into the forests. On October 31, 2022, just a few days after Kanato disappeared, 3 firefighters were out for a hike on Mount Daisingen. They climbed about halfway up the mountain when they decided to sit down and rest. While they were resting, a brown bear emerged from the brush and began attacking the men. The bear first knocked one of the firefighters down and began to bite him furiously. When one of his friends tried to intervene, the bear immediately pounced on the second firefighter, biting and clawing him as well. As it menaced the rest of the men, one of the firefighters pulled out a knife he'd been packing. The bear began to close in on him, and he slashed at the bear, striking it in the neck. His swipe with his knife severed a major artery and sent the bear fleeing while spraying blood from the neck wound. The firefighters made their way back down the mountain and reported the aggressive brown bear to authorities. This brazen attack by the brown bear sparked an intensive search for its body. They weren't positive it had died, but based on its reported injuries, thought it may have succumbed to them. As searchers climbed Mount Dysagon slopes, they found a dead brown bear. It was about the same size as the bear that attacked the firemen, but didn't have a knife wound in its neck. They found a second bear of a much smaller size nearby, also dead. After canvassing the area, they stumbled upon Kanado's body. The 22-year-old had been savaged by a brown bear and partially eaten. The bear had cached his body under dirt and sticks to be consumed later. Forensic crews gathered Kanado's corpse and the carcasses of the two bears. They also took evidence from the attack site for analysis. Kanado's cause of death was declared to be due to blood loss from the hundreds of wounds inflicted by the brown bear. His death was not fast and may have taken hours before his passing. The scientists examined the larger bear and found it to have no major injuries. They were most interested in finding a knife wound in its neck, but when they searched its carcass, they couldn't find one. The contents of its stomach were examined, and it was determined to have consumed Kanado's flesh. The smaller bear was not found to have ingested flesh from Kanado's corpse, but its cause of death was not listed in any source I could find. With all the evidence and analysis, authorities had some difficulty in making sense of it all. Was the larger bear the same bear that had attacked the firefighters and had killed and eaten Kanado? Or had that bear and its cub been killed by a larger bear that had ambushed the firefighters after killing and eating Kanado? After putting the puzzle together, the most likely scenario emerged. The larger bear must have attacked and killed Kanado, afterward caching his body for food. Then the sow and her cub came to feed off Kanado's remains. It must have killed the sow and cub in defense of Kanado's corpse as its food cache. It was most likely the same bear that had ambushed the firefighters, and had likely died elsewhere after suffering the grievous knife wound to its neck. Searchers never found the carcass of the big bear with the knife wound to his neck, but it is assumed that the wound ultimately led to his death. Since April 2022, 160 injuries and 3 human deaths have occurred in Hokkaido. Kanado's death was the first human fatality to bear attack in over a decade in all of Japan. This rapid increase in attacks is attributed to a dwindling food supply and human populations fleeing agricultural areas around cities. Authorities in Japan have become so desperate to stop bear attacks that they have turned to technology for a solution. They've started using monster wolves. These huge robot wolves have glowing red eyes and sound a howl that reaches 90 decibels. Monster wolves are stationed near known bear traffic areas. They view the monster wolves as a form of scarecrow to frighten the bears away. There are an estimated 6,500 to 10,000 brown bears on the island of Hokkaido alone. These bears are unique as they are darker in color than other brown bears and have a longer skull and lower slope in their forehead. They can stand 7.5 feet in height and weigh up to 1,100 pounds. After reviewing the facts surrounding this episode, I'm left with a few questions for you. Do you think the agricultural areas now being vacated are bringing brown bears closer to cities on Hokkaido? What is emboldening brown bears to attack humans in Japan? Is the lack of management of brown bear numbers leading to overpopulation and increasing attacks on humans? Do you think robot wolves are a great idea to deter bears? I will be glad to read and reply to your thoughts, so please post them in the comments section below, and let's talk about it.
Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks.
Today's episode takes us to the farmlands of Karnataka State in central India. To the southwest of the city is a rugged and isolated patch of forest mountains. The Thimlapura forest covers these mountains, which stretch northeast right into the town of Madagiri. The granite domes and peaks in the mountain range rise to around 2,500 feet in elevation and create a sloped jungle where many species of animals live. Denizens that live here include wild boar, Indian elephants, gaur, sambar, and barking deer. Predators in this area include Bengal tigers, Indian leopards, wolves, dholes, which are an ancient wild dog, and sloth bears. These animals find shelter in forests of mixed evergreens and semi-evergreen trees like Borneo mahogany, false hemp trees, and Malabar tamarind trees. In the Thimlapura Wild Conservancy, sloth bears embrace one of their few remaining sanctuaries. They can live up to 40 years old, which makes them the longest living member of the bear family. Usually standing between 5 and 6 feet in height and weighing from 120 to 310 pounds, they are more diminutive than other bear species. The bears subsist on fruit, termites, and honey, and rarely attack human beings. Their canine teeth and claws are proportionately the largest of the bear family. At about 11 a.m. on the morning of November 20th, 2014, 45-year-old farmer Samana was planning on hiking into the more remote part of his property to harvest aloe vera. After exiting his home, he picked up his machete and walked along the sloping trail to the wooded area. As he searched the ground for the pointed leaves of the aloe vera plants, he wandered the brush and navigated the trails. The brush was thick and hid many possible dangers. Cobras are common here, and many other deadly snakes inhabit the area as well. As he hacked a few plants, he would put them in a bag held on his waist. At times he had to push brush out of the way and push his way through bushes. This kept his focus off of his surroundings and allowed him to find himself in dangerous proximity to a sloth bear. Samana rounded a large bush and stood face to face with a sloth bear. He thought he was making enough noise to let any animal near him know of his presence. The bear stared blankly at the man from only a few feet, but the bear nor the man moved for a few seconds. Samana's mind raced with what he should do. He knew that sloth bears were extremely violent and dangerous, but hoped it would dash off into the forest. As his adrenaline peaked, Samana decided to protect himself, as opposed to run. He struck out with the machete and slashed the bear in a defensive attack bent on saving himself. After absorbing the first few strikes from the man's machete, the sloth bear dealt a few strikes of his own. It wrapped its paws around the man's legs and tackled him to the ground. Now atop Samana, the bear began biting into his cheeks while it jabbed its long claws into the flesh of his face. It raked its claws back as if it were tearing apart a termite mound. Instead of termites being scattered, Samana's flesh was tattered into bleeding strings that dangled from his face. Samana screamed for help, and his cries soon reached the ears of passers-by. A small crowd began to gather, then grew to a larger crowd. They immediately phoned the police and returned to the attack site to try to help Samana. The bear's attack never relented over 4 hours, while police waited for permission to kill the bear. The crowd watched as it dug its huge canines into the man's eye sockets and ripped bone and flesh from his face. Over the course of the attack, Samana began to move slower and resist the bear's violence with less effectiveness. He was losing blood very quickly and tissue even faster. The crowd began to throw rocks and yell at the bear, trying to get it to back off and stop tearing the man apart. As the crowd watched, the sloth bear began to chew off the flesh of Samana's right thigh. They continually pelted the bear with rocks and yelled, but it could not be deterred. After continuing its attack, it suddenly switched its focus to the angry mob. It stormed toward the crowd as they fled in panic. As he ran, 55-year-old manual laborer Thamaya stumbled just as the bear approached him. The bear didn't miss a beat and pounced on the man, attacking his face. A video of this attack is provided in my Patreon account, which is linked below. I will warn you that it is one of the most disturbing videos I've ever seen, so watch it at your discretion. The sloth bear utilized the same technique to tear Thamaya's face apart as it had with Samana's. It jabbed its claws deep into the flesh of his face and ripped it apart. The bear was observed cracking the bones of the man's forehead and cheeks during the violent and bloody attack. Police who were on the scene could do little to frighten the bear away. They fired 5 warning shots into the air, hoping to drive the bear off. After watching the attack on Thamaya, they finally fired a fatal shot into the bear, which brought the attack to an end. Once the bear fell over dead, the crowd grabbed Samana's corpse and the injured Thamaya and dragged them to the hospital. The bear's carcass was examined, and it was noted to be 12 years old and was likely starving. By the time the bear was killed, it had consumed all of the flesh of Samana's right thigh and a significant portion of his left thigh as well. Thamaya was rushed to Victoria Hospital in Bengaluru, where he was treated for multiple lacerations and bite wounds to his face, body, and arms. He did survive the attack, but his face will be deformed for the rest of his life. Sloth bear attacks are not common in India. Usually the bears disappear into the forest after they attack people, but this bear refused to leave. Also unusual was the fact that it consumed a large portion of its victim. It is believed that the refuge extending so far into the city was what allowed the bear to wander into the farm. On the refuge, the bear would rarely see people, and likely never had a close encounter with one. In the Tumakuru district, authorities say there is an average of 5 sloth bear attacks each year, with most of those ending in severe damage to the victim's face. Many survive, but a few attacks are serious enough to cost the victims their lives. Samana's attack was the first sloth bear attack in which the bear ate its victim. Sloth bears cling to an existence across India and Southeast Asia. Only 8,000 to 10,000 sloth bears remain, spread across their habitat. After reviewing the facts surrounding this episode, I have a few questions for you. Do sloth bears see humans as competition for prime habitat or resources? Should sloth bears be saved through land use reforms? Why are sloth bears so overpowered with giant canines and claws? I will be glad to read and reply to your thoughts, so please post them in the comments section below, and let's talk about it. Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks. Today's episode takes us to the Norwegian Arctic island of Svalbard. It's about 800 miles from the North Pole and 500 miles north of mainland Norway. Many areas in the Arctic are surrounded by cold ocean currents, which make them too cold to support plant life. Svalbard is surrounded by relatively warm ocean currents, which raise temperatures enough to allow for some plants to grow there. These currents bring warmer air to support the 2,026 species of mosses, lichens, fungi, and plants. The farther north and south you go toward the poles, the fewer species are present in ecosystems, and the more specialized they have to be. Caribou are an example of a specialized species and are the only large mammals on the island that are not predators. The predators on the island include Arctic fox and the polar bear. Svalbard was the center of a total solar eclipse on March 21, 2015. This stunning natural phenomenon occurs when the moon passes directly between the sun and the earth, disturbing light and shadow patterns. I experienced being close to the center of a solar eclipse in August 2017 in western Idaho. It was one of the most intriguing moments of my life, and I have photos to prove it. The announcement of the solar eclipse in Svalbard created a rush for reservations at area hotels and housing rentals. The region only has about 2,500 people, and many of them rented a room of their home out to one of the 2,000 eclipse fanatics for extra income. Svalbard is a beacon for ringed seals, walruses, and beluga whales, which are all primary prey for polar bears. Where you find prey, you'll find predators, and polar bears are plentiful here as well. Locals know that they need to pack firearms at any time when they venture away from civilization, but some visitors aren't so savvy to the rules. The authorities in the area require anyone leaving inhabited areas to carry a hunting rifle or be accompanied by a local armed guard. The danger polar bears present to unaware visitors is taken so seriously here that Ronnie Brunvall, the head of the Visit Svalbard organization, states that security is number 1, 2, and 3. On the evening of March 20th, 2015, 37-year-old Jakob was resting inside of his tent for the evening. He'd traveled to Svalbard with 5 of his friends, and they'd pitched camp along a snowbank for the night. With temperatures hovering below zero and light fading by early afternoon, the campers found comfort within their tents. Each tent in the expedition had a high-powered rifle leaning outside of it for easy defense against polar bears. The group also erected a security fence around their campsite, which would alert them to any approaching bears, and then they snuggled into their warm sleeping bags. The expedition also established a bear watch, and Mrs. Hakova was on duty this evening. She'd set up outside initially and eventually got weary, moving her bear watch inside to the comfort of her tent. She knew she could rely on the bear fence to alert her of anything serious, so she reclined with confidence. Jakob was an avid outdoorsman and loved to ski, snowboard, and snowmobile. He and his friends were from Prague, Czechoslovakia, and had made their arduous trip to the town of Longyearbyen with excitement. The expedition he was with had purchased a group package that permitted them to do these activities in the lead-up to and after the solar eclipse. It was supposed to be like a vacation for them, albeit a cold one. Unbeknownst to the expedition, the fence they'd erected had been placed too high. A hungry polar bear had been wandering the area, following its nose to its next meal when it stalked up on the camp in the night. It easily slipped right under the fence without tripping the alarm, exposing the sleeping campers to whatever the bear chose to do to them. As the polar bear noiselessly padded through the camp, the scent of sleeping people undoubtedly filled its nostrils. An overload of olfactory information was bombarding the bear's nose as it sniffed each tent in turn. For some unknown reason, the polar bear found Jakob's tent most appealing. The fabric of the tent was designed to resist the rigors of wind and snow, but not the claws and teeth of polar bears. Its claws ripped through the tent with very little resistance, and it was quickly inside, atop Jakob. Jostled awake by the polar bear's claws, Jakob opened his eyes to see the gaping maw of a polar bear less than 3 inches from his face. He yelled, "Bear! Bear!" as he scrambled to keep the bear's jaws from clamping down on his face. Using his hands, he repeatedly redirected the bear's jaws from his head. The bear used its paws to grab the man and drag him from the tent. Its claws tore long red streaks along his skin. In the tent next to Jakob's, Mrs. Jakob had let her eyes close and drifted off to sleep during her bear watch. Her slumber was abruptly halted by Jakob's cries about the bear. She scrambled from her tent, clutching the revolver that she had packed with her. Upon emerging, she could see a huge polar bear striking Jakob with his paws, only feet from her. She raised her pistol and fired the revolver at near point-blank range, striking the polar bear with more than 2 of the rounds. The camp seemed to erupt in people yelling and screaming while they converged on the bear. It had felt the impact of the revolver rounds and turned in pain and confusion. The bear dashed off to avoid any further confrontation with the people and stared back at them from only a few hundred yards outside of camp. The campers reached out to local authorities, who soon arrived by helicopter to investigate the polar bear attack on Jakob. They were armed and began following the bear's blood trail across the snow. The bear was located and shot by them only 200 meters from the camp. They took the bear's carcass back to the lab to analyze it. They were interested in knowing the causes of the predatory attack. I found no source indicating the findings of this analysis. Even though no other campers were injured during this attack, the organizer of the expedition was fined $1,200 by local authorities. It was the first time the fine was evoked for a polar bear attack. It was issued because the organizers neglected to perform basic safety precautions to protect campers and bears. Following his attack, Jakob expressed eagerness to return to Svalbard and the beauty of the Arctic. His enjoyment of the area was not diminished due to the polar bear's predatory attack. However, he did express disappointment that the bear attack forced him to seek medical attention. Consequently, he missed the eclipse. Approximately 3,000 polar bears are living around Svalbard, and only 2,500 human inhabitants. Yearly, an average of 3 polar bears are killed by residents defending their life or property. There have been a total of 5 fatal polar bear attacks on Svalbard in the last 40 years. In an episode on our channel, Horatio Chappell's fatal polar bear attack was discussed, and I've linked to it in the comment section below if you're interested in watching it. After reviewing the facts surrounding this episode, I'm left with a few questions for you. Why do you think the campers didn't test the bear fence before they went to bed? Do you think bear spray would have prevented this attack? Would you have the discipline to shoot a polar bear in such proximity like Miss Hakova? If I'm ever put in that position, I sure hope I'm that brave. I'll be glad to read and respond to your thoughts, so please post them in the comments section below, and let's talk about it. Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks. Today's episode takes us to, several locations in western Montana. The 2 primary locations we'll be discussing in this episode are Glacier National Park and Yellowstone National Park. Both locations are steep mountains with vast forests of pine, fir, and spruce trees dappled with patches of quaking aspen. The watersheds are often lined with willow bushes, and wild berries abound in both locations. Each area hosts healthy populations of moose, deer, and elk, with common predators being bobcats, black bears, cougars, coyotes, grizzly bears, and wolves. The pristine scenery and proximity to wildlife are a draw to visitors from around the world. Some of these visitors include photographers, and not all of these photographers' stories end well. Jim Cole was originally from Wisconsin, but after visiting out west decided Bozeman, Montana was the place for him. He attended the University of Colorado and was an amazing tennis player. He worked as a commercial real estate agent through his youth, but the mountains always beckoned to him. After putting away a little money selling real estate, Jim decided to fulfill his dream of becoming a nature photographer and started doing it full-time. Over the years in the woods, Jim had honed his skills as an outdoorsman. He was known to be able to hike for very long distances and hours. His lanky and lean build was a big asset in covering ground to find those photos that few people could get. He'd covered an estimated 27,000 miles in the backcountry, and his photos brought him a little cash here and there. He also took his pictures to area classrooms and wowed the kids with the close-up photos of the animals he displayed. Jim also wrote bluegrass music and sang songs about grizzly bears. His favorite place to perform was the Pine Creek Lodge in Livingston, Montana, where listeners knew him as Grizzly Jim. When Jim ventured into the backcountry to take photos, he used some questionable practices. These risky and illegal behaviors drew the attention of other photographers who would watch him approach well within the danger zone of grizzly bears through their telephoto lenses. Jim's disregard for his safety drew its share of concern and attention. His friend John Waller was a biologist at Glacier National Park and addressed his concerns with Jim on more than one occasion. Waller commented that the bears seemed to give something to Jim that was passionate and powerful. His warnings seemed to go unheeded, and his concerns grew. By the 1990s, the criticism of Jim's photography techniques drew a loud and disapproving chorus from his competition. They reported to rangers that they had watched him follow a sow grizzly and her cub, and that sow had bluff-charged Jim twice before the man would back off. Typically, photographers maintain a healthy distance from animals they photograph and give bears an even wider berth than other animals. Jim's approach was a little different and deemed unprofessional by his contemporaries. He would hide out in the anticipated path of a bear and take very close photos as the animal strolled by. Ethical photographers would move well out of the way of the bear headed toward them, but Jim would stay put, trying to get that perfect up-close shot. In 1993, this practice put Jim in very close quarters with a young grizzly. Too close, in fact. He was hiking up a trail when a bear was hiking down, and was less than happy to see the man at such close distance. The grizzly attacked Jim, tore a hole in his scalp, and broke his wrist. Fortunately for Jim, his hiking partner managed to pull out his bear spray and run the youngster off before it did any more damage to him. His injuries were treated and his wounds healed. But this event did nothing to change Jim's desire to be close to grizzly bears. By the year 2004, Jim's antics finally caught up with him. Rangers had received too many complaints to ignore his disregard for the regulations. They issued him a citation for getting too close to bears when they observed him just 20 feet away from a grizzly sow and her cubs. He was crouched down behind some sagebrush, snapping photos and testing his guardian angel's patience. After being cited, Jim fought the complaint in court. He indicated that the bears had wandered up to him and agreed that he left slower than he should have. He informed the courts that he hadn't violated the law because he hadn't approached the bears, but they had wandered up to him. The courts agreed with him and dismissed the charges the park had filed against him. His case changed how the laws regarding wildlife harassment were written. Newer editions required photographers to maintain a safe distance from wildlife instead of allowing them to move within safe distances. By Wednesday, May 23, 2007, Jim's luck would once again be tested and not exactly pass with flying colors. He was 57 years old and just purchased a new digital camera. He decided to take it up to Trout Creek in Yellowstone to get some photos of the wildlife there. Furthermore, he knew the creek was a great place to find grizzlies, and his penchant for up-close angles was an itch that he had to scratch. Jim carried his equipment bag full of camera gear and bear spray on his adventure up Trout Creek and wandered a few miles into the backcountry by himself. The grass in the meadows was tall for this time of year, and Jim pushed his way through it as he was hiking toward a vantage point on an adjacent hill. Now, sometimes in life, it is what you don't know that teaches you the most valuable lessons, and Jim didn't know that a sow and her cub were bedded down in that tall grass. Jim was fascinated by getting close to bears for his photos, but this time he got much too close. He walked right up to the sow, and she ambushed him from only a few yards, rendering his bear spray nothing more than a piece of evidence at the attack scene. According to Cole, the sow pounced on him so quickly that he had very little time to react. She dashed toward him and tackled him like a linebacker on a running back. She drove his back into the ground, which disoriented him. With one quick swipe from each of her paws, she crushed his facial bones and tattered his cheeks, scalp, and nose. Then she disappeared. Though the attack lasted a few seconds at most, it left Jim in pitiful shape. As he sat up, he had to lift his eyebrow up from obstructing his vision so that he could see the sun to orient himself. He'd been in this situation before, or at least a similar one, and knew he had to get back to medical help quickly. He started his 3-mile return hike on shaky legs and bleeding profusely. As he staggered for the first few miles, Jim picked up a few interested followers. 2 coyotes followed him, waiting for a chance to pounce on him should he fall and fail to rise. Jim did not doubt that the smell of his blood was permeating the forest around him, and coyotes were not the only predators with noses sensitive enough to smell it. Judy and John Taylor were visiting the Hayden Valley when a whim drew them to pull over at Trout Creek, where it crossed the road through a culvert. The couple pulled out some binoculars and began glassing the meadows in search of grazing grizzlies when they saw an odd sight in the distance. About a half-mile away, they could see a man in some kind of strange mask, wearing a pack on his hip, meandering kind of toward them, but not. They kept an eye on the man as he would appear at the top of one rise, only to disappear at the bottom of a swale. Each time the man appeared, he seemed to be walking in a different location, but generally heading toward them. John and Judy discussed this odd sight and agreed that this person must be drunk, or perhaps have some kind of disability. They kept watching him for another half an hour before concluding that this man was in trouble. By this point in his journey, Jim could hear the traffic on the road. He knew he was extremely exhausted, but was driven on by the thought of rescue. By the time Jim had stumbled to within 50 yards of the road, he sat down on the bank of the creek. John pulled up his binoculars and could see that Jim's head was not covered in a mask, but in blood. John immediately knew that Jim must have been mauled by a bear, and jogged towards him. As John approached him, Jim told him that he'd been mauled by a bear, to which John replied, "I could see that." The contorted form before him looked more like a prop from a horror movie set than a human. Jim was missing his nose, eye, cheek, and ear. Jim recalled having a sense of peace and relaxation flow over him at the sound of John's voice. By 1 p.m., 4.5 hours later. As Judy approached the 2 men, she could see ribbons of Jim's face hanging from its proper position. The path the grizzly's claws tore through his face were distinct and started at Jim's neck and continued through his face, exiting at his scalp. What she was looking at was hard to describe as a face, let alone one on a living human being. John and Judy did their best to make Jim comfortable while they waited for an ambulance. His injuries were too serious to be treated at a medical center in the park, so he was flown to Idaho Falls and under care at Eastern Idaho Regional Medical Center. Jim underwent a 7-hour surgery that Thursday to repair damage from the 2 swipes done by the sow's claws. While receiving treatment, Jim was unable to speak and had been intubated to help him breathe. He received his meals through a tube inserted into his stomach. After a considerable amount of convalescing, Jim ended up losing an eye out of the deal. He also had to have his nose, jaw, cheeks, and ear rebuilt by plastic surgeons. Authorities reviewed accounts of the attack provided by Jim, as well as his injuries. They determined the bear had acted in defense of her cubs and would not pursue action to have her killed. About 1 year after his bear attack in 2007, Jim was seated on a high ridge overlooking Hayden Valley, taking photos of bears once again. Now sporting an eye patch where he previously had an eye, Jim could see 2 grizzlies appear several hundred yards below him. The fickle breeze brought Jim's scent to the bears, and they rose to their hind legs and seemed to look directly at him. Upon looking the bears over, Jim was certain by their markings that this was the same sow and cub present at his mauling the prior year. Jim didn't reach for his bear spray, but he took hold of his camera. He wasn't afraid, and smiled as the bears dropped back to all fours and bounded back into the trees. Kerry Gunther is a bear biologist at Yellowstone National Park. He indicated that Jim is the only person to be attacked by 2 grizzly bears in all of North America. On July 22, 2010, at the age of 60, Jim Cole passed away by himself at his private residence from natural causes. Throughout his life, he had violated common sense and laws in pursuit of his passion and paid the price more than once. He compiled 3 books detailing his adventures and displaying his photos. If you're interested in them, you can find them by searching for his name. After reviewing the facts regarding this episode, I'm left with more than a few questions for you, but I will limit it to only 3 or so. Have you ever felt a passion that caused you to set aside your own personal safety and disregard laws? Do you view Jim's actions as a death wish or a life wish? Do you think it was the same sow and cub that Jim saw from the high ridge that attacked him the prior year? I will enjoy reading and replying to your thoughts, so please post them in the comments section below, and let's talk about it. Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks. Today's episode takes us to a place very near to the location of one of our prior episodes. On the Kenai Peninsula in the south part of Alaska, the Kenai River is fed by Kenai Lake and Skylac Lake, and runs to the brim with salmon at certain parts of the summer. The mountains to the southeast give way to rolling hills, which turn into broad forested plains just before dropping into Cook Inlet. Where the mountains turn into rolling hills is where Skylac Lake is positioned. The peaks here don't soar as high as in other locations in the state, but climb to just below 5,000 feet in elevation. The power of nature is felt here twice a day as the Cook Inlet is filled, then emptied, when the tide rolls in and out. Birch, hemlock, and spruce trees provide an emerald shroud over the land to shelter the huge moose that trod the trails. There are many smaller animals here, including foxes, porcupines, hares, lynx, and black bears. But as they seek the salmon in the streams, it is the huge brown bears that are most dangerous. At around 4:30 p.m. on August 4th, 2015, 20-year-old Gabrielle Markell was getting ready to go for a jog with her co-worker and friend, 26-year-old Caitlin Haley. The two were employees of Alaska Wildland Adventures Lodge, which is located on the southern shore of Skylac Lake. Gabrielle's stepdad, Kirk Hosley, was the president of the lodge and hired the girls onto their 9-person staff for the season. The lodge has 20 guests at a time, at most, and provides its visitors with a high-quality vacation experience without compromising comfortable accommodations, according to its website. It is an ecotourism destination that appeals to those in favor of learning about and preserving nature and resources. Each season, the lodge staff and guests complete bear awareness training, which instructs them on how to be bear aware and safe in bear country. As the young women donned their jogging shoes, they planned out their route for their run. Several trails along the lake passed near the lodge and made easy access to trails of varying difficulties. They chose to run up the Cottonwood Creek Trail, which ran directly south of the lodge, and climbed a few hundred feet along its course. As the salmon splashed their way up the stream, the women covered the better part of a mile, surrounded by the beauty of the forest and the fresh mountain air. As they came up to a sharp turn in the trail, they heard an ominous sound in the brush, only a few feet away from them. Now, a part of bear awareness training is focused on how to handle a bear at close range, and how to utilize bear spray to protect yourself. Gabrielle was carrying bear spray with her on this job, and had practiced using it, just in case she needed it. It isn't clear whether the bear was flushed from cover by the joggers, or emerged from it to attack them, but somehow the massive brown bear met them on the trail. Gabrielle pulled her bear spray up as the bear closed in on her, but was unable to dispense the irritant before the bear attacked her. It focused its anger on Gabrielle, knocked her to her back, and bit and clawed her. Caitlin could only watch as the bear huffed and growled as it stood over Gabrielle. She knew she was powerless to defend her own life, let alone her friend's life, and immediately dashed back toward the lodge to find help. The last she had seen of Gabrielle was of her lying on her back, with the bear obscuring her with its massive body. I can only imagine the fear and terrible thoughts that went through her mind. She used them for fuel to propel her down the trail as she arrived in record time. A small rescue team was quickly assembled and headed up Cottonwood Creek Trail to save Gabrielle. They wouldn't have to search too hard for her, because a few hundred yards from where Caitlin had left her, Gabrielle was now slowly walking toward them. Gabrielle was bloody and beaten up, but was able to communicate. The group looked around to see if the bear was following her, but couldn't find it. The rescuers assisted Gabrielle back to the lodge and started working on cleaning her wounds and stopping the bleeding. There were several bite wounds on Gabrielle's head, back, and arm, along with several deep scratches from the bear's claws, but nothing immediately life-threatening. In bear attack terms, her injuries were mild compared to what they could have been, which is kin to saying it was a moderate grenade explosion. They knew that injuries from a bear attack can be misleading, though, and appear to be not as serious as they are. While at the lodge, the staff reached out to 911 to request help to the lodge for Gabrielle. The dispatch guided the lodge staff through assessing Gabrielle's injuries, and they agreed that the best thing to do would be to get her across Skylac Lake to the boat launch southwest of Stirling. Gabrielle was helped into the boat for the half-hour boat ride across the lake, where an ambulance was waiting for her. She was taken to the local medical center, but her wounds were too serious for treatment there. A helicopter flew Gabrielle to Providence, Alaska Medical Center in Anchorage for further medical support. Gabrielle was admitted in serious condition, but by the following day her status had been upgraded to good condition. As a precaution, the refuge temporarily closed the Cottonwood Creek Trail until an investigation could be completed. Stephen Miller, who is a deputy refuge manager, stated that the investigation would focus on the cause of the bear attack and wanted to see if there was an animal carcass near the trail that the bear could have been defending. After looking the area over, the investigators determined that Gabrielle's attack was most likely a defensive attack due to the women jogging up too close to the bear. He stated that the salmon were running up the creek, which would bring bears to its banks. Rushing waters and streams can drown out the noise of approaching people, as well as bears, setting up a potentially tense confrontation. Miller also stated that there was no way to identify the bear since it had immediately fled the area. He noted that the refuge was not interested in putting the bear down due to the nature and circumstances of the attack. Following Gabrielle's attack, Jeff Sellinger, a biologist with the Alaska Department of Fish and Game, pointed out that there are typically 2 or 3 bear attacks in this area each year. Ken Marsh is a spokesman for the Alaska Fish and Game. He advised people who find themselves involved in a confrontation with a brown bear to fall into a fetal position, covering their head and neck the best they can. Laying still should cause the bear to see that you are not a threat, and it will generally lose interest in you and leave. This advice works great when fish are running and bears are content, but after the salmon stop running, Mr. Marsh fails to list a strategy to deal with a bear demonstrating predatory behavior. After completing their investigation, authorities declined to identify a clear cause for Gabrielle's attack. Alaska Wildland Adventure Lodge's general manager commented that employees had been hiking the trails around the lodge for 15 years without incident before Gabrielle's attack. After reviewing the facts surrounding this episode, I'm left with a few questions for you. How do you know if you should curl into a fetal position or defend yourself in a bear attack that occurs within only a few seconds? Given the bear bit Gabrielle's head, do you think it was trying to kill her? Since there were no cubs sighted at the attack site, was this bear defending its fishing grounds? Is ecotourism a realistic business model, or does it intrude into bear habitat unnecessarily? I'll be glad to read and respond to your thoughts, so please post them in the comments section below, and let's talk about it.
Thank you for watching Scary Bear Attacks. If you've enjoyed this episode, please consider clicking on the like button and clicking on the bell icon. We'll help you know when we post our new episodes. Posting our video links to your social media profiles furthers awareness, and it's fun. We slashed our prices in our merch store, linked below, so check out the bargains there while you shop. As a member of our human community, remember to adventure bravely and be careful out there, especially in bear country.